Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, and above me here on the screen is Joe Clark. And we want to apologize to you guys for going AWOL for a couple of weeks. It was a interesting couple of weeks there at the end of the season for the Steelers Depot crew. I think it was myself Alex got sick, and then he kind of got over it pretty quickly, and then I had the flu, and then Alex had the flu, and then Joe had the flu. So we had a bunch of sicknesses, and we had to cover for each other, and it was tough to pull off to do the podcast. So definitely want to apologize for not being there on the show. Nothing's happened to the show. We are still here. It was just a couple of weeks where it just wasn't going to work out. So we have a lot, obviously, to discuss today. The Steelers lost in the playoffs, another one-and-done playoff appearance, 5 in a row. That's 6 straight playoff losses in a row if you count the 2016 loss at the end of that run there. And they lost in embarrassing fashion on top of it. Once again, you look at the first quarter kind of scoring differential over their loss streak in the playoffs. It's very poor. 73-0? Is that correct? 72-0, 73-0?
I believe so.
Not
Ugly.
great. Not great. Ugly. Yes. And so we have a lot to talk about, and we're going to talk about, obviously, recapping that playoff game just a little bit, although it's kind of been, by this point, even though it's only a few days old, it's been talked about a lot. And then we'll, of course, dive into some of the more recent stuff, like George Pickens playing a little bit of hooky or being a little late on Christmas Day, and what that means. We're going to talk about Mike Tomlin and some of his end-of-year press conference stuff and just some of the player thoughts from their locker clean-out day. Before we dive in, Joe, you had a good holiday and everything?
Yeah, quickly, I want to give a quick belated birthday shout out to my grandfather. I know he's one of our biggest fans. Recently celebrated his birthday, so I wanted to give him a quick birthday shout out while we're on the show. But yeah, good holiday here. How about you?
Yeah, can't complain. Turned 30 myself over the holidays there, so no aches and pains yet. So I'm counting my blessings, but I'm sure they're
There
coming.
we go.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a good holiday season. Obviously, other than the Steelers sucking it up for I don't know how many weeks in a row, 3 of those games happened in 11 days, so it just felt like a constant barrage of the Steelers sucking. So that was interesting, but overall, holidays were good. We're gonna dive into the first topic here, talking about the playoff loss. The Steelers allowing 299 rushing yards, basically 300. It was 300 if not for the kneel down at the end of the game that knocked them down to 299. We're talking about a historic performance by Derrick Henry against this defense. Lamar Jackson running at will. Kind of both of them just running at will. Jackson barely had to throw, but when he did throw, he was, taking his sweet time, 6 seconds, 6-7 seconds, getting the ball out, a couple of touchdown passes. No mistakes. No, I mean, there was not even a close interception or a fumble that, nearly, there was nothing like that. It was mistake free for them. Pretty much just a thorough beating from start to finish. The Steelers put up a little bit of a fight, I guess, in the third quarter where there was a brief moment where they gave just a glimmer of hope, but it was so quickly snuffed out by the Ravens. Joe, what stuck out to you the most from this game other than what I just went over there?
Yeah, I just really didn't like Pittsburgh's game plan against the run because I feel like in the past when they've had success against Lamar Jackson, it's been them crashing down on him, and they didn't really do that today. They played, or not today, the other day they played a lot more conservatively. And I mean, you play conservatively against Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry. One of them will find a way to make you pay, and at times it was both of them. It was just your classic Steelers playoff game. They got down 21-0 in the first half. The Ravens driving into the first half, I think, was really key because if you could have kept it 14-0 at the half, you at least leave yourself a little bit more hope heading into the second half. And then it's 21-0, and you're like, well, that's really going to be hard to come back from against an explosive offense. And when the Steelers seemed to have, as you said, that glimmer of hope was the Derrick Henry 44-yard touchdown run that more or less sealed the deal. And just frustrating just how they played down the stretch. There wasn't really a whole lot of fight. It's will to win. Like week 18, you had the defense was a little bit of a bright spot, and you're like, all right. And then they didn't play great against Baltimore. The offense played better in the second half. A little bit of a bright spot, just pretty bad. So yeah, not a whole lot of positives to take away from that one.
Yeah, not too many positives. I guess you could argue Russell Wilson was a lone bright spot in the game. Obviously, he didn't do enough in the first half. Nobody on the offense did enough in the first half. I mean, guys that you needed to do well, like Pat Fryermuth, you're seeing, he had a drop on one of the first kind of possession downs of the game. And then he followed it up on, I think it was like 3rd and 1 or something like that. And he wasn't able to power through kind of a one-on-one situation where he was, close to being able to convert. He kind of got stuffed before he was able to convert, and the Steelers went ahead and punted. So yeah, not a ton of bright spots. I think Russell Wilson's third quarter was like what we've seen him do this year and what we kind of hoped he would do in this game or throughout this 5-game loss streak. He showed some of that in this game, but unfortunately it was too little too late. And yeah, Derrick Henry just kind of snuffed that hope out pretty much immediately. TJ Watt, no stats for 2 games in a row. Not even just without a sack. He was held with no stats. And that's highly unusual, let alone 2 games in a row for him. The defense only had 1 sack, I think. And what's that? Highsmith for 10 yards, I believe. And of course, the Ravens immediately converted on, it was like 2nd and 20, and they just immediately got a first down off that sack. So the defense didn't even get any value out of that sack, really. Patrick Queen had the flu, he told the media. Interesting there. Cam Hayward, we kind of had hoped that his flu wouldn't spread. He played through the flu against the Bengals there and had, one of his best games of the year, really. And I was just kind of crossing my fingers, hoping that this flu wasn't going to rip through the locker room. We saw Chris Boswell pop up on the injury report with an illness throughout the week, and kind of, oh boy, is this starting to spread throughout the locker room? But lo and behold, you go into the game and nobody's ruled out or questionable with an illness, and we come to learn that Patrick Queen had it. I wouldn't be surprised if somebody else on the team also had it, maybe a couple people. And just just based on what we experienced, us Steelers Depot people, it was tough enough to write about football. I can't imagine trying to play through the flu. So props to them for doing that. Apparently he needed like 4 IV bags before the game just to get going. But obviously Patrick Queen was kind of, I don't think he really had his best game there, so his illness kind of showed. And yeah, it was just, I don't know how much more we need to talk about this game. It was just kind of a depressing loss. Another one in a long line of them in the playoffs. The Ravens were clearly the better team. And of course, that's now sparked a lot of conversation about the future of Tomlin, the future of this team. And we'll get into all of that in the third topic. But today, the breaking news with George Pickens. Unfortunately, we're talking about Pickens again for something negative. And this is something that happened on Christmas Day, so this was a few weeks ago at this point, but the reporter chose to break that news today. And what it was is the Athletics' Mike DeFabo essentially said that he was late showing up to the game that day and saw, I guess, a PR person for the Steelers frantically looking around near the media entrance, and lo and behold, George Pickens shows up. I think they're supposed to show up 2 hours before kickoff or something like that, and he was showing up, I can't remember the exact timing, but it was after the inactives were due, and so he was late. This was his first game back from his hamstring injury. Obviously, not a good look. There's apparently reports of he's been late several times, I think dating way back to earlier in the season. Rafe Fittipaldo said something similar. All this said, Joe, what the heck do they do with Pickens now?
I mean, I don't really see much of a path for him going forward in Pittsburgh at this point because there's been just too many incidents that for them to pay him a big money contract just doesn't really seem like something they're going to want to commit to just because you don't really know what you're going to get out of him. And I mean, the production's kind of been there. There's been a few games where he's been a disappointment this season. I just don't really just see a path forward for him to stay, given that we're now in his third season and week 17 of his third season, he's showing up late to games. So at this point, like, yeah, the receiver position's really weak, but there's ways they can attack it this offseason. I think Omar Khan will probably learn from his mistakes of last offseason, not getting a legitimate number 2. And if they move on from Pickens, they're going to get 2 or 3 guys that I think they feel they can contribute. And you still have Calvin Austin showed some flashes. Roman Wilson's still a bit of an unknown. So you still have some pieces there to work with, but you still obviously need to get 2 legitimate contributors, I think, if you do move on from Pickens, which I think is probably the best path forward because if you don't pay him, he's going to be disgruntled next season. Disgruntled George Pickens is probably not really what you want at all, given what he's done, even when things are seemingly going well. So I think the most likely path forward is that he will be shipped somewhere um, to another team that will, I don't know, find a way to tolerate him or try to tolerate him. I mean, we've seen all these receivers that get shipped out of Pittsburgh, then their careers kind of crash and burn. I think he's still young and he's still immensely talented. I don't know. We're going to see his career crash and burn. And his issues are more of an attitude. They're not, criminal or anything like that, which, I mean, hey, you'll take that. But I just don't think that it's going to work out for him in Pittsburgh going forward, given everything you said. Mike Tomlin's kind of non-committal about his future in his press conference today. So um, I think somebody will pay, you can get a mid-round pick for him based off talent alone. So we'll see what happens. I don't know when it'll happen. Ideally before the draft, you can get a pick in this year's draft. Maybe use it to take another receiver. But I do think Pickens is probably going to be dealt this offseason.
Yeah, I mean, what Tomlin said today. What was his exact? Well, first of all, he denied really even knowing about Pickens' thing, or he kind of gave a non-answer, which is essentially him
He,
basically just saying, "I don't want to talk about it."
he said he forgot, but you're not going to forget if a guy shows up late to a game or not. Like if he showed up on time, he's like, no, that's crazy. He showed up on time. So he was like, yeah, no, that was a few weeks ago. Like I forgot about it. Like no, you didn't forget about it. But I mean, good non-answer. But obviously, everybody can see right through it.
and
But yeah, then he
sorry, go
talked
ahead.
about he said he's got a lot of growing up to do still, a lot of room for growth. He even said like he might have to adapt the way that he works with him to try to get the result that they want. And he said, I mean, they haven't had contract negotiations with anybody yet. It's 2 days after the season, but he said they haven't talked to Pickens yet. But he said there's a lot of room for growth for him, which you don't really want to hear for a receiver coming off of year three, like 1 year until he hits the market. You don't want the guy to be like, yeah, there's still a ton of room for growth for him as a person off the field at this point. So I don't know if he's going to be worth the headache much longer.
Yeah, and I guess you just kind of wonder, should they have taken more public disciplinary measure, over the course of the last 3 years? Maybe try and nip it in the bud, like maybe last year when something popped up, or if he has been late all these times, make an example out of it. You wonder these things. Who knows what's going on behind closed doors? Mike Tomlin said he deals with stuff differently behind closed doors, and obviously he doesn't tell the media what's going on. He said several times he doesn't want to fan the flame, which is understandable. But sometimes that public pressure will get people in line, and certainly if a player who they might not remain with this team, they don't want to be looking bad to their future employers either. So I don't know, just something to think about. It's an unfortunate situation. Without him, the Steelers have basically nobody at wide receiver. Calvin Austin, maybe they'll bring him back on a cheap, 1 or 2 year extension. He had an okay year, I think, in terms of a little bit above expectations. Still not like quite up to the level of a wide receiver 2, but could you sign him at like a wide receiver 3 kind of contract? Maybe. Beyond him, I mean, Roman Wilson, you really hope that works out at this point. I still have high hopes for him just based on watching him at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was the best receiver there, and that includes, Lab McConkey was at that Senior Bowl, and I think Ricky Pearsall, and so a lot of good players were there, and I think Roman Wilson stood out even among that good group, and so I do still kind of have hope for next year, and just an unfortunate injury situation. And so who knows what they're going to do. I think Khan's going to have to sign somebody. I think he's going to have to draft one high, but Steelers have seemingly a lot of needs, which, if you asked me a month ago, I probably wouldn't have said that same thing. But now it kind of looks like there's a lot of needs. We're going to have all offseason long to talk about their needs, so we're not going to dive into that right now. But anything else on the Pickens situation that we needed to talk about? I don't think so. No.
Yeah, nothing on my end.
Well, we'll dive into some Tomlin Tuesday stuff then. Move on to our third topic. And we are going to actually answer a couple of questions today to catch up on some of the questions that we missed while we were out sick. And so thank you guys for sending those questions in. If you do want to have a question answered, vent your frustrations, whatever it might be, you can call the number at the bottom of the screen, 412-254-3145. You can actually call or text that. Today we actually got some text questions. Or you could just tweet at us. I am at Ross_McCorkle on Twitter. And what are you, Joe, on Twitter?
I'm at jclark1233.
Yeah, just tweet at us and ask us a question, and we will be happy to answer them that way as well. Moving on to our third topic about Tomlin Tuesday and some of the stuff that players said as they cleaned out their lockers. I think one of the more notable things was the fact that TJ Watt and Pat Freiermuth were kind of going to bat for Mike Tomlin. This is stuff we've heard year after year. But, this year in particular, you kind of thought maybe that we'd reach a breaking point because last year Arthur Smith kind of had that rising level of frustration. There was more or less a mandate of let's get in the playoffs and actually win a game. They made a lot of changes. They brought in an external offensive coordinator. They signed the highest paid external free agent in team history. They completely overhauled the quarterback room. They heavily invested in the offensive line. They attacked a lot of their issues, so they pulled a lot of those levers, and yet they still went 10-7, and they still lost in the first round of the playoffs. So you kind of thought this Tomlin stuff would reach a breaking point, but it seems like, Jerry Dulac and Adam Schefter have reported that he's, expected to stay. From everything Tomlin said today, he seems like he's staying. He was asked directly about the trade rumors, and he said, save your time. So don't expect that to happen. So Tomlin's coming back. But what are these changes that Tomlin talks about? He said changes at all levels was what his direct quote was. Joe, what are some of these changes at all levels? Because I'm struggling to see what these actual changes might be at this point.
Yeah, so what I found interesting was last year at his end-of-year press conference, he kind of definitively said, like, our quarterback next year will be on the roster, and that obviously didn't come true. This year, he shied away from saying that. He said, they're kind of evaluate all options at quarterback. So to me, that makes it seem like he did say he would be open to Justin Fields starting next year and talked about, he had some praise for Russell Wilson, but he didn't definitively say that, the quarterback's on the roster. So I really do think they're going to evaluate everything when it comes to that position. I think we could see a change, some small coaching staff changes. Terrell Austin, I think, is probably a candidate to be let go. That would probably go down as a major change. Will that happen? I don't know, because Tomlin kind of has been talked about pretty extensively, especially over the last few days, but over the last few years, as Tomlin has his fingerprints all over the defense. So is he going to replace Terrell Austin and bring in somebody that might want more control over the defense, or is Rooney going to mandate, hey, maybe you have to take a step back and you can't have as much control over the offense, the defense? Because even the offense, I think it was Mark Cabal talked about in the fan. Like, Tomlin was the one who came out and said it's his idea to run the ball all against the Bengals, and they ran the ball to no success because they wanted to keep the ball away from Joe Burrow. So that wasn't necessarily an Arthur Smith led idea. So unless you have an ownership mandate of Tomlin that he can't be as involved, in some of these play calling or scheme, the design stuff like ahead of the games, game planning, then I don't really see him moving on from Terrell Austin because he gives Tomlin what he wants. I could see Pat Meyer being let go as the offensive line coach just because the offensive line, Broderick Jones hasn't really developed. Troy Fautano's an incomplete case because he got injured, but kind of wilted down the stretch this year. Ganmore Jr. looked really good to start the year. And he had struggled his first 3 years, but he looked really good to start this year. And they're like, all right, maybe it's some positive development. He kind of wilted down the stretch as well. So I could see him being let go. And then, I don't know, I would like to see them add, to the coaching staff. They've routinely had one of the smallest staffs in football, but, add, a few different offensive analysts or, a few guys maybe just wherever, just to get some more thought in the building, just to get, just more, I guess, more people is never necessarily a bad thing. Use more ideas. So I would like to see them maybe expand their coaching staff. Do I think it will happen? Maybe not, but given the way the last 8 years have gone, you'd think they'd be open to some more change. So I think really their biggest changes are going to be in the quarterback position. And I think my personal prediction, I'll say right now, is that they re-sign Justin Fields and stick with him. But that's a position where I think you can see change, and I think Fields still constitutes change given they were with Wilson in the second half, and then potentially the defensive coordinator and then offensive line coach. So like two I guess semi-major staff changes, but I don't think we're going to see anything super super huge when it comes to the coaching staff.
Yeah, I think Pat Meyer is. I mean, I agree. Terrell Austin is probably the biggest, I guess, quote unquote, major change to happen. But how much of a major change is that? It's kind of a major change in name only. Tomlin has kind of been in charge of the defense since LeBeau left all those years ago, and so I mean, you bring in somebody. I don't know if Tomlin's necessarily ceding control. Maybe Art Rooney kind of puts a mandate there, but at the same time, Art's not going to be in there day to day, kind of managing how the game plan's being put together. And Tomlin's been around forever. It's hard to just kind of cede power at this point. I mean, I personally don't see a massive major change happening on defense there. But on offense, I think offensive line coach is an interesting one. Pat Meyer's been dealt kind of a crappy hand, if you ask me. He's had no talent really to work with up until this past year. And then you had Nate Herbig injured. You had Sayamalu injured for part of the year. You had Frazier injured for part of the year. You had McCormick injured for part of the year. You had to cycle through, Spencer Anderson into the mix. They even had to deal with Calvin Anderson in that playoff game there for a bit. Who else? Troy Fautanu injured. I mean, it's a lot of not great things to deal with for him, so you kind of feel for him. But at the same time, I do think he needs to go. And they're in a great position, I think, in terms of attracting a very, very high-end offensive line coach because of how much high-end, kind of high-profile, high-pedigree talent they have along the offensive line. I remember thinking back to when Mike Munchak joined the team, and he specifically cited working with a guy like Marquise Pouncey at center really kind of attracted him to work with the Steelers at the time. And I think the same can probably be said about whoever joins next is, oh my gosh, they've got Zach Frazier, one of the top rising centers. Troy Fautanu, who, anyone who was watching offensive line tape before last year's draft was in love with that guy. Broderick Jones is kind of a piece of clay that, I think the right offensive line coach could still get a lot out of. And then you got Mason McCormick. You got a lot of kind of young, rising potential. And so a good offensive line coach could really make a name for themselves if they come in here, turn it into a top offensive line. That could be a, jumping pad for them to, then become an offensive coordinator or something if something goes well. So I think that they could potentially attract a very high-end kind of offensive line coaching talent there, which could really pay, big dividends for the Steelers. That's kind of the biggest change I can think of, though, because, I mean, what? Are you going to change wide receiver coaches again? Probably not. He wasn't really given much either. Are you going to change? I mean, Tom Arth, probably not. Maybe. I mean, it would be odd. They still have some of their assistants from the year prior. Maybe they clean house of some of those old kind of like Matt Canada folks like Sullivan and like Faulkner, and bring in some new ideas in those areas. Could we see sweeping changes at some of the position coaching spots? And maybe that's maybe we have some unexpected ones with some of the position coaches. But I do, there's a few that I actually really like Curry. I think's great at inside linebacker. I'm a big fan of Grady Brown back there in the secondary, though the secondary kind of underperformed this year. Could he be a surprise? They also have Anthony Midget back there. I mean, there could be shuffling with some of these kind of like tertiary coaches. It'll be interesting to see. And I'd imagine they'll start moving on that pretty soon. They just signed a bunch of future contracts today with players, and kind of the next step is starting to do these exit interviews with players and coaches with Mike Tomlin, and then they'll start to part ways with some of these coaches, and so they can hop into the hiring process as soon as possible. The Senior Bowl's in just a couple weeks, and usually they try to have as much of that locked up as possible prior to the Senior Bowl. So we will see. I'm trying to remember, was Zazani before or after the All-Star stuff last year?
I believe Azani was right before or during. Because I know they hired Arthur Smith during the Shrine Bowl last year when I was there.
It was right after.
So it was right after. I was going to say it was probably get the offense coordinator and then get the position coach. So yeah, it was. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So this year, unless they change coordinators, which you'd think they'd do that, you'd think they'd start that process, as soon as tomorrow if they're going to fire either coordinator. You'd think that will happen. I think we'll probably hear about Arthur Smith's head coach interviews that he has elsewhere over the next 24, 48 hours. He said he was kind of waiting for the season to conclude before doing those. We'll probably hear about those soon. And then some insider was saying that they think he has a good chance for the Jets job. I don't really buy that, but I guess we'll see. If he leaves, then obviously you might be looking for 2 new coordinators, which would then probably shake up the coaching staff tremendously, including many position coaches. So we'll just have to see in that regard. Tomlin was pretty complimentary of Smith, saying that it was a good experience this year working with him. What else from this? Well, TJ Watt said he wants to be a part of the solution, kind of shutting down brief chatter about what do you do with Watt in terms of, do you let his contract expire, or does he let his contract expire and kind of look for a team that can contend? He wants to be a part of the solution, so don't expect him to want to leave, though we'll see what kind of contract gets worked out this offseason. If they don't, he will be a free agent the following year. What else from Tomlin here, Joe?
Yeah, not really anything crazy there. I mean, I think just the one other thing is he kind of downplayed the idea that you can't find your franchise quarterback late in the draft. He said Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts, but I mean, historically, I mean, yeah, you can find Tom Brady. You can't just find Tom Brady in the 6th round. I mean, the Steelers just got signed Skylar Thompson, who was a 7th round quarterback. Like, you're not going to find a guy that's going to be consistent, winning quarterback for you in the later rounds or even late in the 1st round consistently. I mean, Jackson and Hurts are good. They're fine examples, but I mean, you can pull up Brandon Weeden, you can pull up Johnny Manziel, you can pull up, and those are 2 Browns quarterbacks right there, but you can pull, there's countless examples of, late 1st round, 2nd round quarterbacks that, just haven't panned out. I mean, Mason Rudolph for the Steelers is an example. So, I mean, not that the Steelers are even be looking for a quarterback, but especially in a weak quarterback class, it's like you're not going to find a guy that's going to become, a Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, you know, all the time in the late 1st or 2nd rounds. I think it's kind of just a rare example. So that was just kind of him pushing off the answer. Um, but yeah, I mean, the Steelers are kind of just in a weird spot right now that they're good, but they're not good enough to actually do anything meaningful, but they're not bad enough to, be able to draft high and get a game changing player. So they have guys that are, they're good players, are just getting older and older, and then they have to supplement through free agency. And I mean, like Patrick Queen, I thought he had like an okay year, but he wasn't, and he wasn't a superstar for him. So I think the Steelers kind of have to look to start being more aggressive in terms of bringing in higher end talent in free agency if they want to reach that next level, given the fact that they're not drafting to get, those sort of game changing players.
Yeah, just going back to the quarterback thing briefly, I pulled every quarterback who's made a Pro Bowl, who was drafted past the 20th pick, so 21 and beyond, all the way down to undrafted. Since 2000, there's been 23 of those guys who have made a Pro Bowl. If you throw out the random guys like Tyler Huntley and Tyrod Taylor and Gardner Minshew, and I mean, there were some very funny names that popped up on here. Who was, I was laughing at one of them. Oh, Matt Castle, Matt Schaub, who made 2 Pro Bowls. If you throw out those kind of guys who I would firmly not label as franchise quarterbacks, you get really down to 10 guys who are franchise quarterbacks that have been drafted 21 or below in the draft overall. And of course, the Steelers have the 21st pick. So the odds are not great, but, to Tomlin's point, you can find them. It's just, more people take chances that don't work out than this list than the 10 that have worked out on this list. You're talking about Aaron Rodgers, Lamar Jackson, Drew Brees, let's see, Jalen Hurts, Russell Wilson, Kirk Cousins, Dak Prescott, Tom Brady, and Brock Purdy, and Tony Romo. So there's your list of people dating all the way back to 2000, and some of those are quite a while ago that worked out. And so if you're looking at the kind of active quarterbacks, that's a much smaller list. And, the jury's still out on some of those guys too. So you can't really label them complete franchise guys yet. So it'll be an interesting discussion to have in what is supposed to be a weak quarterback class. Now, will that weak quarterback class kind of play into the Steelers' hand? Is this going to be kind of like the Kenny Pickett year, where there's only one quarterback in the 1st round, and so the Steelers might get, their pick of the litter between some of these kind of like 2nd-tier guys, and then maybe they do get lucky. That Kenny Pickett year, it didn't really work out for anybody. So, yeah. So I guess that kind of disproves that. But there are examples where these guys get pushed down a little bit. Like Hurts is a great example. That year, Burrow, Herbert, Tua, and Jordan Love were all drafted in the first round that year, and it kind of pushed Hurts down a little bit. And he was like, I don't know, pick 53 or something that year. The Steelers have pick 21 and they have pick 52. So, if there's a Hurts kind of guy available, maybe even a Jalen Milroe, another Alabama guy in that range, maybe that's something they look at. But I just thought that was an interesting comment by Tomlin because, they're not going to be picking in that top, 15 or 10 to kind of get the necessary talent. So then you either have to package up a big trade and kind of take a huge gamble, or you just have to hope that somebody falls to you. And I kind of am more inclined to believe that they'll do the latter, where they just kind of pick what's available to them. Maybe they trade up a couple of spots if somebody that they really like falls. But anyway, there'll be plenty of time to talk about all that. We're going to dive into our listener questions here. We had one from Samuel Morris, and this one came in through the text line at 412-254-3145. What's the biggest change you want the Steelers to make? Staff, player, front office, organization? I think we kind of addressed some of this, but Joe, if you had to boil it down to one singular change that you want them to make that you think would make the biggest difference, what would that be?
I would say just get rid of their stupid organizational precedents. Like the Steelers act like they're this world-class organization, but world-class organizations find a way to win playoff games. So right now they're not a world-class organization. So let's not go with the hard and fast. We don't sign free agents, or we don't give extensions during the season. They won't bring in outgoing players, or outgoing players have a higher average per year than guys on the roster. Until you start winning, then you can go back and puff your chest out and act like you're this great organization. But until you start winning, do what's best to help you win. They're handicapping themselves for no reason, just because they want to act like they're the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Rooney family and Mike Tomlin, but you're not winning anything. So I just, at this point, it's just so dumb to me that they're purposely handcuffing themselves just because they want to set this precedent that they're this great organization that does right by everybody, but you don't win. So I would just do what it takes to win.
Yeah, the one pushback, I agree. I think that some of the precedents are kind of just all right, what are we doing here? What they hold themselves to the standard that, I mean, in the end, the standard is not it's kind of goofy to me that everybody holds them to this, they must win the Super Bowl every year kind of standard, and that they hold themselves to that kind of standard. On one hand, you do want them to always try and win. I don't want them to ever, throw to get a good draft spot or anything like that. But I do think there are times where it hurts them. The one pushback I have on what you said about signing people in season is the main pushback on that this year was the idea of signing Russell Wilson to a big long-term deal in the middle of the season. And had they done that, they'd be in kind of a panic mode right now because he did not finish the season all that well. And so now, you kind of got to look at the totality of the season before making a decision on Russ. And now, he's much cheaper than he would have been had they signed him, a little bit over a month ago, when everybody was kind of talking about this rule of not signing people in season. So there's positives and drawbacks to that. But in terms of the biggest change I want them to make, I think the offensive line coach is probably the biggest meaningful thing. Offensive line coaches are often the run game coordinators. I know Arthur Smith has a hand in that as well, and he has kind of the offensive line background, and his philosophies are all run first, but he needs the right offensive line coach. I think the Steelers last time around, it's hard to attract an offensive line coach when your offensive line is in shambles. So they got Pat Meyer. Nothing wrong with him, but there's bigger names out there, better minds out there. And certainly in terms of offensive coordinator, last time around they had Matt Canada. A good offensive line coach isn't going to want to work for a kind of unknown or, not very respected in NFL circles, Matt Canada. So now they have a highly respected offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith. They have a ton of talent that the right guy can come in. I think that is going to make the biggest change, even though, it might fly a little bit under the radar. Think about what Mike Munchak did for this team back in the day. If they could bring somebody in who kind of rights that ship, that is a huge, huge step towards making everything work. The offense, really fixing the defense because the offense isn't wearing out the defense, all this stuff. And so That's my answer. Another question here from Michael Adesso on Twitter. Thank you for the question, Michael. Would you sign or still offer Russ to a contract? How much and how long? Joe, you kind of already said Justin Fields is kind of what you would do. So are you saying no, you would not offer Russ a contract at any price, or is there a price at which you would consider it? What's your take here?
Offer, I'd offer him a contract that he wouldn't accept. I'd do something like stupid cheap, like I don't know, 2 years, 35 million with an out after the first year. Because then if he's a backup, you're paying that's like not extremely egregious backup quarterback money. And then you kind of give yourself insurance if you can't bring in somebody else, and or if Fields leaves or something like that. I think given how he finished the season, he's probably going to get somewhere between 20 and 25. Um, but I would do some if I did offer him a contract, it'd be something you have an easy out after next season, and where there's no guarantee that he's going to be the starter. So like I don't know, two for 35, 2 for 36, like cheap money. That's not really anything crazy. Not a lot guaranteed. I mean, like none guaranteed after year one. Um, because then I don't know if you run it back with Fields, and if you think he's going to be better than Wilson, you run it back with both of them, and Field starts, which is personally what I would do next season, regardless. But not running back with both of them. I'd start Fields. I don't really think Wilson's going to come back to be the backup, but then you just give yourself some insurance that way, and somebody that did show he can win with them. But uh, given that there's almost no chance he would accept anything on those terms, then it's kind of a moot point. So I guess my answer would be no, but I would if there's this super cheap deal that was very team friendly.
Yeah, it's hard to argue in favor of a Russ contract, but I thought there was an interesting answer. I think Tomlin said something along the lines of somebody asked, like, hey, you've had quarterback instability like 3 or 4 of the last straight seasons. And he said, yeah, and, 3 of those last 4 seasons, we've had early playoff exits. And so he was kind of hinting at, like, yeah, we don't want to have this quarterback instability. So, are they looking at Russ coming back? Russ said he wants to come back. It's kind of up in the air. I I do think ultimately he will come back, much to probably many people's dismay. I think, I mean, you see enough from him to where it's like it's doable. I think that just like they weren't able to support him with the running game. The offensive line was, I mean, some of the sacks were his fault for holding onto the ball too long, but the offensive line was doing him no favors either. And again, the running game couldn't get going. By the end of the season, the defense wasn't doing jack anything, and so you're forcing him to kind of push to make up for the defense's sins, more or less. I think just the whole complimentary football went out the window, and we did see a glimmer of, and not just really a glimmer, it was like multiple games, and even one that against the Bengals where he looked fantastic. I mean, for a while there, he was pacing to have the best season of his career if you extrapolated it out to a 17-game schedule. And we're talking about a potential Hall of Fame career. So I think that we've seen enough of that in him where I would still offer him a contract. How much? I mean, yeah, you said what, 2 years, 35? I mean, maybe like 3 years, 60 would be like something I would shoot for, because I think he's going to want some of that security. If you could structure it in a way where you can get out after the first or the second year, so it's a little more team friendly. Russ isn't going to have a ton of options, I wouldn't think, and especially with Justin Fields there to kind of use his leverage against him, be like, hey, we have Fields that we like enough. You take this offer or leave it, and good luck finding whatever's next for you. I think that they could get into something like that, and he seems to want to come back, so we'll see how much he wants to come back. But I hope that answers your question there, Michael, and we do appreciate you asking that. Again, give us a call, 412-254-3145. I'm Ross McCorkle, that's Joe Clark, and we will catch you guys next week.